The old city hall sat like a forgotten throne, cracked pillars and all. Inside, a long table dominated the marble chamber, 12 chairs around it, 11 filled with men who talked too much, and one man who didn't talk at all. Kieran sat at the far end, arms resting lightly on the polished oak. No laptop, no presentation, just an empty manila folder. His eyes tracked every speaker with quiet precision. The city was replacing the Crosstown Bridge, a creaking iron skeleton over the Dalen River, and the contract had attracted the wolves. 5 bidders, 1 project, $100 million at stake. The room buzzed with noise. Numbers flew across the table like knives. Deliver in 14 months under budget. Imported steel from Cormac Foundries. Pre-approved. Safety margins tested at 5% above. Every man leaned forward, selling hard. Except Kieran. He waited. Doran, the biggest contractor in the city, jabbed a thick finger at the blueprints. Let's not waste time. My bid is the most realistic. We've done 6 bridges, none have failed, and none have run late. These new boys, he glanced at Kieran, can draw whatever they want on a napkin. Laughter, nervous, too loud. Kieran blinked once. Nothing more. Councilman Reeves looked around the room. Mr. Kieran, you haven't said anything. Care to speak? A hush fell. The air tightened. Kieran lifted the folder and slid out a single sheet. No one breathed. This is a metallurgical report from 3 weeks ago, Kieran said calmly, placing the paper in front of the council. Steel samples from Cormac Foundries showed microscopic fracture lines under thermal stress. Every bid here except mine uses their materials. Silence. Doran snorted. That's unverified. Kieran cut him off, still quiet. The reports from the State Safety Bureau, signed by Director Halden himself. Would you like me to call him? No one answered. Councilman Reeves read the document. The creases in his brow deepened. My bid, Kieran continued, uses locally sourced alloy from Briar Ridge. It costs more, but it won't collapse in 20 years, or 5. A single phrase. Won't collapse. Suddenly, Doran's experience looked like a liability. The younger contractors fidgeted in their chairs, eyes darting to their own blueprints. Everyone had assumed Kieran was unprepared. Now he looked like the only man who had actually done the math. Councilman Reeves folded the report slowly. We'll take this under deliberation. Thank you all. Chairs scraped. Bidders shook hands with rehearsed smiles, but no one looked at Kieran. They avoided his eyes like the edge of a cliff. Outside, the wind whistled past the marble steps. Kieran stepped into the cold, slid the folder under his coat, and walked without hurry. Behind him, a voice called out, Hey! It was Mason Grant, another contractor, younger, sharp suit, shaky voice. You played that well, Mason said, forcing a smile. You knew about the steel issue the whole time? I didn't have to know, Kieran said. I just had to wait until they were certain they were right. Mason blinked. And if they hadn't used Cormac steel? Kieran shrugged. Then I'd have spoken last for nothing. But they always talk too much. All I have to do is let them. He stepped into a black sedan. As the door closed, Mason stared after him, a small frown forming. It was the first moment anyone realized. Kieran wasn't just quiet. He was listening to win. That night, Kieran sat in a quiet apartment. No lights except the low glow from a desk lamp. Blueprints for the Crosstown Bridge lay across his desk, but he wasn't looking at the bridge. He was looking at an old photograph tucked into a steel-framed box. A man with calloused hands, smiling by a river, a stonemason's badge pinned to his chest. Kieran ran a hand along the edge of the photo. Almost there, he whispered. 3 days after winning the bridge contract, Kieran received a message that simply read, Briar Ridge, delivery canceled, no further orders allowed. No explanation, no apology, just silence. He didn't panic. He never did. Instead, he sat perfectly still at his drafting table, the city's blueprint spread before him like a battlefield map. The bridge design was final, every bolt, beam, and slab accounted for. But without the Briar Ridge alloy, the stronger, more expensive steel that had won him the bid, he'd be forced to use substandard imports. And that would unravel everything. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and waited. "Briar Ridge Foundry," said a clipped voice. "Kieran Holt." A pause. Then a polite but evasive tone. "Apologies, Mr. Holt. We're under new policy. Contracted output is now exclusive. We can no longer honor your order." Kieran's eyes narrowed. "Who bought the output?" he asked. "We're not authorized to share client data." He hung up. They didn't have to say it. He already knew. Doran. The man must have panicked after the council meeting. Rather than fight Kieran in the open, he went sideways, bought out the only domestic supplier of the steel Kieran needed, shutting him out. A smart move. To most people, it would look like a natural shortage. Nothing illegal, nothing loud. But Kieran had spent years studying how cities work, and he knew something they didn't. Every foundry needs a storage license. And the Briar Ridge warehouse, the only place they could legally store steel within city limits, was on city property, which meant it was bound by municipal storage rules. And those rules had loopholes. 2 days later, a quiet hearing convened in the dusty third floor of the city records office. 2 clerks, 1 legal advisor, 1 man in a gray coat, Kieran. He placed a folded document on the table. A 1994 bylaw titled Temporary Municipal Storage Rights for Emergency Infrastructure Projects. Under this code, Kieran said, the city may requisition registered materials stored on municipal land for use in public works. The Crosstown Bridge qualifies. I'm requesting emergency requisition of the Briar Ridge stockpile. The clerk blinked. But the foundry stores their steel on Dock Warehouse 12, Kieran cut in. City-owned, registered. They never moved their inventory off-site. That means, under this code, I have the right to redirect the inventory, provided it's used for city infrastructure. And the foundry approved this? No, Kieran said simply. But they don't need to. The city owns the floor it's sitting on. The room was quiet. No one moved. Finally, the legal advisor leaned forward. It's obscure, but it's legal. That afternoon, Doran Yasman arrived at Warehouse 12 to pick up steel for their next project, only to find Kieran S.'s signature freshly stamped on the access gate. City Authority Stamp, Darfur 117, Emergency Requisition, all inventory sealed pending transfer. Doran called Kieran within the hour. "You want a war, Holt?" he spat. Kieran didn't answer. He didn't need to. By the end of the week, the first beams of Briar Ridge steel were delivered to the construction site under Kieran S. project banner. Reporters arrived, snapping photos. Integrity First builder Kieran Holt breaks ground on new Crosstown Bridge. Public praise mounted. Councilmen smiled. City pride swelled. And Doran? He had to order his steel from a foreign port with a 3-month delay and a 50% markup. The move that was meant to sink Kieran had become a trap of his own making. Late one evening, Kieran stood at the edge of the river, watching cranes shift the steel into place. The sound of chains and engines echoed over the water. Behind him, Mason Grant approached again. "You always know something others don't," Mason said. "That trick with the storage law? Genius." Kieran didn't turn around. "I don't need to know everything. Just enough to wait until the wrong man speaks first." Mason hesitated. "You ever wonder if they'll stop underestimating you?" Kieran finally looked at him, eyes cold and flat. "They can't help themselves. They think silence means weakness." He turned back to the river. "They never see the trap until they're already in it. If you are enjoying this story, I would really appreciate you to like, subscribe, and comment from where are you listening from. What's the time now? The room smelled like wood polish and old money. It was the Land Registry Hall, a vaulted space lined with dusty portraits of men who once carved neighborhoods from wilderness. Now it echoed with tension. Only 3 people had been cleared to bid on the final parcel of city land along the riverfront. A thin strip just 400 meters wide, worthless to most, but not to Kieran. He sat in the back row, motionless. To his left, Anton Kells, sharp in a blue suit, real estate mogul with a temper like a blown fuse. To his right, Raymond Blake, older, slower, with eyes like chipped granite, a man who bought land and made cities beg for it back. Both were known, powerful, rich. Neither noticed Kieran. He was quiet, alone. Just another name on the clipboard. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Lot 47B, South Bank parcel. Bidding begins at 4 million credits. Anton's hand shot up. 4.2. Raymond raised a finger. 4.5. The game had begun. Kieran didn't move. Not yet. The 2 men locked eyes, each pretending they weren't paying attention, while clearly escalating. 5 million, Anton said, voice clipped. 5.3, Raymond countered. Sweat appeared at the auctioneer's temple. These weren't ordinary numbers. Kieran simply watched, eyes fixed not on the bidders, but on the blueprints folded in his lap, the ones no one else had access to. The ones that showed where the bridge's foundation would shift after construction began, and where the value of Lot 47B would multiply tenfold in 5 years. They didn't know. Not yet. 6 million. 6.4. Anton was leaning forward now, his jaw tense. Raymond didn't blink. 7. 7.3. The auctioneer paused. Going once. Raymond raised his hand again, flat and deliberate. 8. The room stirred. That was the limit. Everyone knew it. The land was valuable, yes, but it was landlocked, narrow, and needed rezoning. Unless you knew what Kieran knew. Still, he said nothing. He watched Anton. The younger man was cracking. Not because of the money, but because he thought he was losing to Raymond. 8.4! Anton snapped. Raymond's lips curled, but he stayed quiet. Kieran's fingers tapped once, slow and quiet, against the bottom edge of the blueprints. There it is, he thought. Now. He lifted a hand. The auctioneer's head whipped toward him, startled. Yes, Mr. Holt? 10 million, Kieran said calmly. Gasps. A pause like an earthquake before the shake. Anton spun in his seat. Who the hell is this? Kieran didn't respond. He didn't look at them, just at the blueprint. Raymond raised an eyebrow, calculating, but something in Kieran's voice gave him pause. He didn't raise the bid. Anton was boiling. 11! Raymond frowned. The air had changed. This wasn't a bluff. 11.2, he muttered, trying to bleed the silence. Kieran didn't blink. 15. Now it was a hammer blow. The auctioneer froze. Mr. Holt, just to confirm? Kieran nodded once. 15. Cash. Transfer ready. He slid a document across the bench. A pre-approved bank clearance. The room cracked open. Anton stood, knocking his chair back. He's bluffing. Kieran looked at him for the first time. Not angry, not smug, just certain. You're bidding against shadows, he said. I already own the light. The auction ended 30 seconds later. Kieran won the land. Anton stormed out. Raymond left in silence. A week later, the council approved a slight adjustment to the Bridge S support arc, citing better river current management. The arc placed a major foundation just 20 meters north of Lot 47B. Kieran's land. Property value tripled in projections. In a dark car on the way home, Mason Grant sat beside him, still stunned. You baited them into bidding each other into a corner, Mason whispered, then struck when they were exhausted. Kieran folded the blueprint back into his satchel. They were chasing each other, not the land. Mason turned to him. How did you know they wouldn't outbid you again? Kieran stared ahead, his voice barely audible. Because they'd already spent their pride. That night, Kieran placed a new nameplate on a steel box in his study, another small piece in the puzzle. It read, Lot 47B, Anchor Line, and below that, for CH. The council chamber buzzed like a hornet's nest. 14 city officials sat around a horseshoe-shaped table. The public seats were full. Lawyers, developers, reporters, and bureaucrats packed into the room's wooden gallery. On the docket, Proposal Z117, the zoning reclassification of the South Bank sector. The proposal's approval was the final key to unlocking Lot 47B's transformation. Without it, Kieran's land was nothing more than an overgrown riverbank, and someone wanted to kill the vote. Councilman Oren Vell, gray-haired and sharp-tongued, slammed his notes on the table. Z117 opens the floodgates to unchecked development. It benefits one man, one, and no one else. Scattered applause from the gallery. Oren smiled like he'd already won. Kieran sat 2 rows back. His expression didn't change. No fidgeting, no glances, just listening. One by one, the council debated. Loudly. Councilwoman Janeth tried to push back. The rezone includes pedestrian walkways and commercial zones. It's not just for one developer. And guess who owns the central parcel? Oren barked. Kieran Holt. His name rippled across the room. Kieran didn't flinch. Behind him, Mason leaned in. He's got them stirred up. Think they'll tank the vote? No, Kieran murmured. Why not? Kieran's gaze remained fixed forward. Because none of them read the fine print. Half an hour in, the debate turned personal. Councilman Jaron accused Oren of playing politics with city contracts. Oren snapped back. Janeth stood and shouted about ethics. Half the room was yelling. The other half was pretending not to. Mason looked nervous. You sure we shouldn't? Kieran raised one hand, just enough for Mason to stop talking. Then Kieran stood. He didn't go to the podium. He walked straight to the side of the chamber where the public records officer sat. He handed her a sealed document and a USB drive. Distribute this to the council, he said quietly. Motion 117A. It's already been entered. The clerk blinked, confused, but obliged. Within minutes, every council member had a digital copy. Oren paused mid-rant to open it on his tablet. What is this? Kieran's voice carried for the first time. It's the addendum you missed. Oren squinted. Read. Then froze. Clause 7, he said aloud. Public transit clause? Councilman Jaron looked up. A rail station? Kieran nodded. The South Rail expansion is already funded. The city just didn't have room for a station. He pointed toward the map on the projector. A digital plan appeared, a public rail station built directly into the edge of Lot 47B, funded by rezone credits and state subsidies. Janeth read aloud. Projected to reduce South Bank commute times by 34%, eliminate 2 bus routes, and increase pedestrian traffic by 300%. Silence. Oren's mouth opened, then closed. He had walked the council into fighting a man who had already made the project a public good. Jaron leaned forward. You added this today? No, Kieran said. 2 weeks ago. But I knew you'd all wait until today to actually read it. The vote passed 9-5. Rezone granted. Council recessed. Kieran walked out without a word. Outside, a junior planner named Tobias sprinted after him. That station, you knew the council would fight. You made them look petty. No, Kieran said without stopping. I made them choose. Tobias blinked. Choose what? Whether they wanted to be right? Kieran stepped into the elevator and faced forward. Or remembered. The doors closed. That night, in his quiet study, Kieran opened a new blueprint. The rail connector platform, set into the river-facing edge of Lot 47B. He took out a photo, the same old stonemason, sleeves rolled, smiling by a rickety footbridge. Kieran placed the photo on the drawing board and whispered, "First rail, just like you wanted." He drew a soft pencil line from the station to the bridge. Then he turned off the light. The office was too perfect. Sleek glass desk, marble floors, a wall-sized monitor looping promotional videos of skyline projects in Dubai, Osaka, Toronto. And behind the desk sat Silas Crane, charming, tanned, and 2 decades deep into the world of global construction empires. His cufflinks probably cost more than Kieran's car, but Kieran didn't look at the decor or the skyline. He was watching Silas's hands. They moved too much when he spoke. Always a tell. "I've read about you, Mr. Holt," Silas said, leaning back in his chair. "The quiet genius of Dalen. 3 projects in 3 years, all delivered, all profitable, very local." Kieran didn't respond. Silas smiled. "Let's fix that. I'm offering a joint venture, Crane and Holt Infrastructure, 50-50 split, my capital, your designs." Kieran blinked once. That was all. Silas continued, gliding into his pitch like it was choreographed. "We'll start with the Lot 47B expansion. I'll bring in global investors, scale it into a mega project. Hotels, transit hubs, even a riverfront stadium. You'll be a star." He slid a thick folder across the table. It landed with a satisfying thump. "Review it. But I suggest you sign by Friday. Once the press release goes out, market confidence will double your land value." Kieran didn't touch the folder. Silas's eyes sparkled. "I know your kind. Builders, planners. You don't care about PR, but I do. Together we become something unstoppable." Kieran stood. Silas frowned. "No questions?" "Just one," Kieran said. "When did you acquire Broxland Capital?" Silas's jaw twitched, a fraction of a second. "Why?" "No reason." Kieran walked out. Outside, Mason was waiting. "That guy's everywhere. What's the angle?" "He wants the land," Kieran said. "But he wants me to think he wants the project." "So it's a trap?" Kieran looked up at the skyline. "No," he said. "It's a test. He's gauging how greedy I am." The next day, Kieran signed the preliminary partnership agreement. Mason stared at him. "Wait, you're actually doing this?" Kieran nodded. "Every lie needs room to breathe." Within 72 hours, press releases hit every outlet. Crane and Holt announce mega riverfront venture. Global capital floods into Dalen City project. Silas Crane returns with boldest move yet. Crane's name was everywhere. Kieran's was smaller, quieter, exactly where he wanted it. Behind the noise, Crane's legal team began moving fast. They quietly filed zoning adjustments, added clauses to financing contracts, began shifting permits from Kieran's name to the partnership. On paper, it looked seamless, but it wasn't, because every document routed through a city registrar that owed Kieran a favor, and every change left a signature trail. Kieran said nothing. On Friday afternoon, Crane invited Kieran back to the office. "Exciting week," Crane said, pouring himself an espresso. "I've already secured backing from 2 Asian funds. We're going to blow the doors off this thing." Kieran nodded once. Crane leaned forward, confident now. "Here's the final equity adjustment. We'll move it to 60-40. You get slightly less, but with a golden parachute and a non-compete clause. Standard stuff." He slid another folder across. Kieran picked it up this time. He flipped directly to page 43, then page 76. Then he closed it and said, "Sure." Crane froze mid-sip. "What?" "I'll sign it." Crane's grin faltered. "You will?" "I trust you." That made Crane blink. Once, twice. No one ever trusts the man who moves too fast. Especially not Kieran. That night, Kieran held a quiet meeting in a lawyer's office across town. He presented 6 signed documents, 6 zoning modifications. all with Crane's signature, all filed before the partnership clause legally took effect. And every single one, illegal, because they transferred government-controlled zoning rights to a private foreign entity without council review. A felony. Monday morning, City Hall exploded. Silas Crane's name was on every bulletin. His stock tanked. Legal notices flooded his inbox. The Land Use Board suspended his permits pending investigation, and just before noon, the city issued a formal reversal of every zoning clause Crane had submitted. All rights reverted to Kieran. At 4:00 p.m., Crane called him. "You set me up?" Kieran didn't reply. "You waited until I overreached." Still no reply. "You said you trusted me." Finally, Kieran spoke. "I trusted you to act like yourself." Then he hung up. Later that night, Mason sat across from him in the empty construction office. "You knew from the beginning." Kieran unfolded the partnership folder and dropped it into a shredder, page by page. "I just needed him to touch the paperwork," Kieran said. "You tricked a billionaire into sinking his own ship." "No," Kieran said. "I let him believe it was his ocean." Rain fell in slow sheets as the trucks rolled into the yard. 10 flatbeds, each carrying the latest shipment of Briar Ridge steel, pre-treated, rust-resistant, custom dimensions. Kieran stood under the overhang, arms crossed, coat buttoned high. He didn't speak. The foreman, Juno, waved down the first driver and climbed onto the rig. His face changed the moment he saw the top layer of beams. He jumped off the truck. "Something's wrong," he said. Kieran didn't ask what. He walked to the truck and looked. The beams were warped, subtle, barely visible, but enough to matter. Each curve would throw off load distribution by fractions. Fractions that in bridge design meant disaster. Kieran stepped back. "Seal this site," he said. Juno nodded and began shouting orders. 2 hours later, city inspectors arrived. Clipboards, cameras, questions. An older man in a trench coat, Inspector Doyle, stepped forward. "These came from your vendor," he said, frowning. "But the paperwork says your crew signed off at the rail yard." Kieran said nothing. Doyle flipped his notes. "If your men received this knowingly, that's sabotage." Mason, standing nearby, looked nervous. "You think someone's framing us?" Doyle didn't answer, just marked something on his clipboard and left. Kieran walked back into the site office. Calm, silent. But inside, gears were turning. That night, Kieran reviewed every delivery log, every camera feed, every route. There was one inconsistency. Truck number 6 arrived 47 minutes later than the others. It didn't stop at the standard rail depot. It diverted through Grove Transfer Yard, a privately leased terminal owned by a logistics company called Marex Freight. Kieran opened a new window. Marex's ownership led to a shell company in Luxembourg. And that trail, it ended at Doran Holdings. The next morning, Kieran called a meeting. Not with the city. Not with his crew. He called Doran. They met in a private room at a riverside steakhouse. 2 men. No food. Kieran spoke first. "You warped the shipment, damaged the beams. You wanted the city to shut me down." Doran didn't deny it. "You can't prove it," he said flatly. "Even if you could, what jury would care? You got a bad load. Happens every day." Kieran nodded. "You're right," he said. "I can't prove it." He stood to leave. Doran smirked. "Finally learning when you've lost, Holt?" Kieran turned at the door. "No," he said. "Just giving you space to celebrate. You'll need it." 3 days later, Doran's name was all over the headlines. Exclusive. Major supplier accused of shadow steel scheme. Council investigates potential bid rigging via Marex Freight. The expose included photos of the Grove Yard transfer logs, signed by Marex staff, plus internal documents from a whistleblower inside the depot. None of them traced directly to Kieran, but every one of them implicated Doran's holding company. Worse, they revealed that Marex Freight had been quietly intercepting material from multiple city projects, swapping standard parts for cheaper variants. Suddenly, the city wasn't just worried about Kieran's bridge. They were worried about every bridge. At an emergency council session, Kieran attended but didn't speak. He simply handed Inspector Doyle a single-page summary. A comparison of bend tolerance tests, showing how the warped beams would have failed in exactly the way the inspection claimed. Pre-sabotaged, Doyle muttered. We've been fed a lie. He looked up. You planted that trail, didn't you? Kieran's face was unreadable. I didn't sabotage anything, he said. I just followed the delivery. By week's end, Doran was under investigation. All charges against Kieran's crew were dropped. The steel beams were replaced, this time with armed oversight at every checkpoint. And at the next city inspection, Inspector Doyle walked the length of the steel columns and gave a quiet nod. Perfect alignment, load tested, approved. That night, back in the site trailer, Mason pored over the news on his laptop. Why didn't you just accuse Doran outright? He asked. Kieran looked out at the dark skyline. Because if I accused him, I'd be part of the story, he said. Instead, I let the story find him. Mason sat back. You ever get tired of holding your fire until the very last second? Kieran didn't look away from the river. If you fire too early, he said, you only wound. He tapped the window once. I don't aim to wound. The Crosstown Bridge site slept under the rain, a skeletal giant in mid-birth. It had been weeks since the Doran scandal broke. Investigators swarmed his holdings, and for a while it seemed Kieran could finally build in peace. Then, one morning, a package arrived at his apartment. No sender. Just a plain wooden crate, the kind used for delicate instruments. The delivery man said it was left at the freight dock, prepaid and tagged with Kieran's name. Kieran stood over it for a long moment before prying the lid open. Inside was a model bridge. Not his bridge, but something older, stranger. Hand-carved in dark wood with spindly beams that bent at unnatural angles, it looked like an architect's nightmare. Beneath it lay a single envelope, no return address. He opened it carefully. A single sentence. You can't build on broken ground. No signature, no clue. But the handwriting, tight, disciplined, reminded him of someone who'd spent their life drafting blueprints. He called no one. He didn't like inviting panic into his circle. Instead, he set the model on his desk and examined it under the desk lamp. The carving wasn't random. The bridge's support columns were subtly warped, in the exact same way the Briar Ridge beams had been sabotaged. Whoever sent this wasn't guessing. They knew the method. That night, he drove to the city archives, not the official offices, but the old records vault near the wharf, where blueprints from before the digital era gathered dust. It was past midnight when he found what he was looking for. Blueprints for the Dalen River West Bridge, built in 1973 and condemned in 1985 after unexpected structural failure. The failure diagrams matched the warped beam pattern perfectly, and in the corner of the blueprint was the name of the original lead engineer, Harland Givens. Kieran froze. Givens had died the same year the bridge failed. Accidental fall from scaffolding, according to the records. But Kieran knew that name. It was on the back of a photo in the steel-framed box in his apartment, the one of the man by the river with the stonemason's badge, his father's. Kieran's eyes narrowed. The message wasn't just about sabotage, it was about history. And someone was reminding him that this fight over the Crosstown Bridge wasn't new. It was old and personal. When he left the archive, the rain had stopped, but the streets glistened like black glass. He drove home slowly, the crate in the passenger seat, one thought grinding in his mind. They wanted him to remember. 2 nights after the crate arrived, Kieran got a call from an unfamiliar number. No introduction, no pleasantries. Just, Riverside Foundry, backloading dock, midnight, come alone. The line went dead before he could respond. He didn't bother asking himself if it was a trap. Everything in this city was. Instead, he dressed in the same gray coat he'd worn to the city records hearing and drove out. The Riverside Foundry was a husk, the kind of building you could pass 1,000 times and never notice. Its windows were painted black, its smokestacks silent. But the side gate stood ajar, and a thin sliver of light spilled from the back loading dock. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the metallic tang of oxidized steel. 3 figures stood around a portable heater. One he recognized immediately, Councilman Reeves, the man who had first asked him to speak during the bidding session. The second was a woman in a long navy coat, her hair tied back so tight it looked like it might snap. The third kept his hands in his pockets, face half in shadow. Reeves spoke first. "You've made enemies, Holt." Kieran said nothing. His eyes moved to the woman. "This is Eleanor Pace," Reeves continued, Deputy Auditor for Infrastructure Oversight. Her voice was cold, clipped. "You've been targeted twice now. That makes you leverage. And in this city, leverage is currency." The man in shadow stepped forward, revealing a scar that split his upper lip. "Name's Reese, Logistics Security. I've been watching Marex Freight since long before your little bridge fight." Kieran's gaze flicked between them. "Why am I here?" Pace answered. "Because Doran wasn't acting alone. He's a blunt instrument. The real problem is the consortium, a group of contractors, freight managers, and council affiliates who have been cycling bids through dummy corporations for decades. Your bridge is just one tile in the mosaic, but here's the twist. Someone inside the consortium is trying to burn it all down." She glanced at Reeves. He looked uneasy. "We think the model bridge you received was from that insider," she said. "A message. We're here because if you've been chosen as their messenger, you're in danger from both sides." Kieran let the silence stretch. The heater clicked softly. Finally, he said, "You want me to be bait?" Reese smirked. "Bait's a strong word. Think of it as the visible piece of a bigger play. We leak certain documents through you. You accidentally disrupt a few shipments. The consortium starts turning on itself. And we protect you." Kieran almost laughed. "You couldn't protect a shipment from getting warped. What makes you think you can protect me?" No one answered. The heater hissed. Kieran stepped toward the dock door. "If I'm bait, I set the hook, my way. No leaks unless I choose them, no moves unless I approve them." Pace looked ready to argue, but Reeves raised a hand. "Fine. But if you walk into the fire, Holt, remember, the people you're poking don't just ruin careers. They erase histories." That line stopped him cold. Erase histories. For a fraction of a second, he saw his father's face again in the photograph, the stonemason's badge gleaming. Then the image was gone, replaced by the cold reality of the dock. He left without shaking hands. Outside, the night smelled faintly of the river. Cold, sharp, merciless. He stood by his car for a moment, thinking about the crate, the message, and the fact that the consortium wasn't afraid to reach backward in time to send a warning. If they could erase histories, maybe his father's fall hadn't been an accident at all. 3 days after the dock meeting, Kieran sat in the site trailer long after the crew had gone home. The city skyline glimmered through the rain-streaked windows. Mason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You've been staring at those blueprints for an hour, Mason said. And that's not bridge work. It's not, Kieran replied without looking up. Spread across the desk was a map of the city's industrial zones from 1987. Most people would be seen faded lines and obsolete zoning codes. Kieran saw opportunities. You know what this is? He asked. Mason squinted. An old zoning map? Not just that. This is before the last warehouse consolidation. Back then, every steel storage yard needed a physical permit displayed on site. When the system went digital, they didn't revoke the old paper permits. They just stopped checking them. Mason frowned. Meaning? Meaning, Kieran said, tapping the map. If I can find one of these ghost permits still registered, I can claim it's active. And if it's active, I can legally requisition anything stored under its jurisdiction, even if the current owners don't know it exists. Mason blinked. You're going to steal from the consortium? Not steal, Kieran said. Reallocate for public works. Perfectly legal, if you know the right chapter in the municipal code. 2 nights later, Kieran was in a storage yard in East Docklands, standing in the rain with a flashlight. The yard's current owner, a tired-looking man named Halverson, met him at the gate. You said you were here for an inspection? Halverson asked. Kieran handed him a folded sheet of paper, a copy of the original 1987 permit, signed by the long-defunct Bureau of Storage Licensing. This yard is still under Permit 7C, Kieran said evenly. That makes it municipal-adjacent property, which means any registered public project can store materials here and reclaim them. Halvorsen squinted at the document, then at Kieran. Haven't seen one of these in decades. That's because most people don't know they still exist, Kieran said. Do you know who's using this yard now? Halvorsen hesitated. Marex Freight rents half the space. Been moving a lot of steel through here lately. Not your kind, though. Imported stuff. Kieran's mouth twitched. Exactly the kind of imports they swap in for better material. Within an hour, he had a crew, quietly loyal men he'd hand-picked from the site, loading flatbeds with precisely what he needed. Briar Ridge alloy, still shrink-wrapped, stamped with the exact batch number from his original canceled order. The beauty of the ghost permit was that every movement was logged as municipal transfer for public works. Even if the consortium checked, it would look official. By dawn, the trucks were pulling into the Crosstown site. The foreman Juno raised an eyebrow when Kieran told him to unload immediately. Thought Briar Ridge cut you off, Juno said. They did, Kieran replied. Then they left the door open. Word traveled fast in the construction world. By the time the morning shift began, whispers were already circulating. Holt got his steel back. No one knew how, but the message was clear. He was still in the game. That afternoon, Mason walked into the trailer holding a folded newspaper. The headline wasn't about Kieran. It was about Marex Freight's inventory discrepancies. They think someone in their own ranks is leaking stock lists, Mason said. They're paranoid. Good, Kieran replied. Paranoia makes people sloppy. Mason hesitated. You're not just after the bridge anymore, are you? Kieran finally looked up from the blueprints. The bridge is just the stage. The real work is behind the curtain. The first sign of trouble was the silence. For 3 days, no shipments moved, no inspectors visited, and no consortium names floated through the rumor mill. In Kieran's experience, silence meant one of 2 things, defeat or preparation. And the consortium never accepted defeat. It broke on a Thursday evening. Mason burst into the trailer, pale, holding his phone like it might burn him. They shut us down, Mason said. Emergency safety audit. Whole site's under lock until further notice. Council order. Kieran didn't ask who pushed it through. There was only one group with that kind of pull. Who's leading the audit? He asked. Mason swallowed. Pace, the deputy auditor herself. The same woman from the dock meeting, the one who pitched him on being their bait. She's not with them, Mason said quickly. Right? Kieran didn't answer. Instead, he walked out into the cold dusk. The bridge loomed ahead, half-finished steel ribs stretching toward the opposite shore. Work lights flickered in the mist. A black SUV idled near the site gate. Pace stepped out, flanked by two inspectors. She looked as precise as ever, hair tight, coat spotless, eyes sharp. "Holt," she said, "we need to talk." They met in the shadow of the East Tower. "Consortium's getting desperate," she said. "They're trying to pull your permit entirely. And they've got something that'll stick, a file from '85 showing safety violations tied to your father's name." Kieran's jaw tightened. "My father died in '85. "I know," she said. "But they're framing it like he cut corners on the Dale and West Bridge. If they make that public, you will be painted as the son of a liability, and your bridge will never open." "Why are you telling me?" "Because I think the file's fake, and I think they're hiding the real report in the Central Archive's restricted section. Only way to clear you and your father is to get it." Kieran studied her for a long moment. Pace didn't blink. "Tonight," he said. The Central Archive was a fortress of brick and bureaucracy, but like any fortress, it had service entrances. At 1:14 a.m., Kieran and Pace slipped through the loading dock with forged maintenance badges. Inside, the corridors were lined with cabinets tall enough to disappear into shadow. They found the restricted room behind a locked steel grate. Pace worked the code with calm efficiency. Inside, it smelled of dust and machine oil. Rows of sealed document tubes lined the walls. Pace scanned the inventory log until her finger stopped. Dalen West Bridge, collapse report, classified 1985. Kieran pulled the tube down, broke the seal, and unrolled the brittle paper. The language was clinical, but the conclusion wasn't. Structural failure caused by substandard steel provided by Cormac Foundries. All supports installed to code. No fault of lead engineer Harlan Givens. Kieran let out a slow breath. The consortium hadn't just erased history, they'd rewritten it. His father hadn't failed. He'd been sabotaged. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Pace stiffened. "We've got company." Kieran rolled the document and slid it into his coat. They slipped out through the side aisle, keeping low behind the shelving. Two figures entered the room they'd just left. One of them was Reese, the logistics man from the dock meeting. "You sure they'll come here?" one voice whispered. "They already did," Reese said, "and now we follow them to see who else they trust." Kieran and Pace moved fast, ducking out a fire door into the cold air. They didn't stop until they were 3 blocks away. "You realize," Pace said, catching her breath, "they'll know you have the report." "I want them to," Kieran replied. The next morning, Kieran called a press conference, not at City Hall, but on the unfinished bridge itself. Reporters huddled on the decking, cameras trained on him with the skyline behind. He didn't give them a speech, he gave them the report. 39 years ago, he said, voice steady. The Dalen West Bridge collapsed. They blamed my father. This is the truth. It was sabotage. By the same supplier many of my competitors still use today, and those same forces tried to sabotage this bridge. They failed. Questions exploded, but Kieran didn't answer them. Instead, he stepped back and let the document, stamped, sealed, undeniable, do the talking. By evening, the consortium was in freefall. Council hearings multiplied. Doran had already been crippled by the Marex scandal, and now Cormac Foundries was under criminal investigation. The shutdown order on the Crosstown Bridge was lifted. That night, Kieran stood alone on the East Tower, looking down at the dark water. The wind was sharp, but he stayed. Mason's voice came from behind him. So that's it? You won? Kieran didn't turn. Winning isn't the point. Then what is? Kieran rested a hand on the steel railing. Finishing what my father started. Building something they can't tear down. Not with lies, not with sabotage, not with history rewritten. The city lights rippled across the Dalen River. Somewhere below, the old bridge's bones slept under silt and time. Above, the new one rose, span by span. Kieran didn't smile, but he stayed until the first light of morning. 2 weeks after the Crosstown Bridge passed its final inspection, the site was nearly silent. The last crews were packing equipment, trucks were rolling out, and the air smelled faintly of wet concrete and machine oil. Kieran stood on the completed span at dusk, hands resting lightly on the rail. The city stretched away on both sides, one side slicked in gold from the setting sun, the other already swallowed by shadow. He'd made no victory speeches. Let the papers talk, let the council preen for the cameras. His work wasn't for them. That night, back in his apartment, he cleared the blueprints from his desk. In the center sat the steel-framed box. He opened it and took out the photograph. His father, Harlan Givens, smiling by the river, the stonemason's badge pinned to his chest. Beside it, he placed the 1985 collapse report. The truth now, not the lie. For a long time, he just sat there, running his thumb along the photo's edge. He thought about the crate, the carved model bridge, the message, "You can't build on broken ground." He still didn't know who sent it. The consortium was in pieces, but some of its players had vanished instead of falling. Whoever had warned him was still out there, maybe watching, maybe waiting. Kieran slid the photo back into the box and closed it. Then he went to the small balcony outside his window. From there, he could see the new bridge's arc lit up against the dark river, each beam perfectly aligned. The wind off the Dalen carried a faint echo, steel groaning, water lapping against hidden pilings. He imagined his father standing here, seeing the span rise and thinking, "This one will last." Kieran spoke softly into the night. "Almost there." Then he turned, stepped back inside, and began clearing the desk again. New papers, new maps. The city was full of bridges, and not all of them were made of steel. The light over the desk clicked on, and the quiet apartment filled once more with the sound of a man planning not just to build, but to outlast.